Hey everyone, I'm Tyler with HAAS Stainless Cable Railing, and in today's video, we're going to be going over the installation procedures for the tensioning and end-stop fittings of the HAAS cable railing system. If you're considering installing your own cable railing system, or maybe you're even in the middle of planning one out right now, hit that subscribe button. We've got a lot of really helpful information and videos on our YouTube channel that are going to help you get the job done and provide you with an awesome cable railing system. To learn more about the HAAS Stainless access system components that we used in today's video, click on the link in the description below that will bring you to the website. Let's get started with the axis straight run installation process. Start by measuring from the inside of your starting post to the inside of your ending post to determine how long to cut your cable. Cut your cable at that length. Now, grab your HAAS Stainless hole marking template and mark your end and corner posts for the pilot holes that will be needed for your HAAS Stainless access tensioning and end stop fittings. With all of your holes now marked, grab a 1/8 inch bit and drill the pilot holes that will be needed at your end and corner post to a depth of approximately 1.5 inches deep. The next step is going to be to mount the axis receivers for your tensioning and end stop fittings to your end or corner post. Chuck up the star bit driver into your drill and then pass the stainless steel mounting screw through the axis receiver. Set your drill at its lowest RPM and then drive your axis receiver into the post with your stainless steel trim head screw. Continue drilling until the axis receiver sits flush up against the post. When securing your axis receiver to the post, be careful to not over-tension the mounting screw. Switch to the opposite end or corner post and then repeat the same process. Now that your axis receivers have been secured to the post at each end of the run, the next step in the process is going to be to secure the cable at one end of the run using your axis straight end stop. Thread your axis end stop swage stud into the threaded eye. We recommend threading all of these together at once to help save time. Now permanently swage your stud and threaded eye onto your cable. Once your swage stud and threaded eye have been swaged onto the end of your cable, rotate the cable clockwise and thread it into the axis receiver. It's always easiest to thread your cable into the axis receiver whenever your cable is as straight as possible. At this point, your cable and end stop should be attached to the post at one end of your run. The next step in the process is going to be to install the tensioning fitting at the other end of your run. To install your axis straight tensioner, grab the axis turnbuckle stud and thread it into the threaded eye. Now thread the turnbuckle stud and threaded eye into the threads of the axis receiver at the post. Now thread the turnbuckle body onto the turnbuckle threaded stud so that the threads are just barely hidden. Then repeat the same process with your turnbuckle swage stud at the other side of the turnbuckle body. Grab the end of your cable and pull it tight up against the turnbuckle swage stud and make sure that all of the slack is out of the cable across the run. While holding the cable right up against the swage cavity of your turnbuckle swage stud, mark the cable at the second measurement notch on the stud. Release tension from the cable and then cut the cable at the mark that you just made. Take the end of your cable, insert it into the swage cavity of the turnbuckle swage stud, and then permanently connect your cable and the swage stud together by swaging the stud. Now, unscrew your turnbuckle body from the turnbuckle threaded stud and then reassemble all three components of your turnbuckle together and then hand tighten the cable. Repeat the same installation process for all of your axis tensioners at the post. Once all of the cables in the run have been hand tightened, be sure to follow this tensioning sequence to ensure that all of the cables are going to be equally tensioned across the run. The tensioning sequence will require you to start with the cable in the middle of the run, then move to the cable above it, and then below it. You'll continue this same sequence until you've worked your way all the way out and have equally tensioned all the cables in your post. Keep in mind that you may have to go back and retension some of your cables. This is called tuning your cables, and you'll want to make sure that you do this before leaving the run. When installed correctly, your AXS system should look just as you see it here. Let's move on to installing the AXS components for angled runs. Start out by repeating the same installation process that you use for your straight runs by measuring the length of your cable needed, cutting your cable, and then marking and drilling your 1.5-inch pilot holes. The next step in the process will be to mount your AXS pivot receivers to your end and corner post. Chuck up the star bit driver into your drill and then pass the stainless steel screw through the AXS pivot receiver. Set your drill at its lowest RPM and then start driving in the AXS pivot receiver up against the post. Continue drilling until the receiver sits flush up against the post. Switch to the opposite end or corner post and then repeat the same process. Now that your AXS pivot receivers have been installed, use a hex key wrench or a small flathead screwdriver to rotate the receiver to your desired configuration. Today we're going to be installing a mock stair run that requires a downward type of angle, so the receiver is going to be positioned vertically. The next step in the process is going to be to attach your cable at one end of the run using your AXS pivot end stop. Thread your AXS end stop swage stud into the AXS pivot eye. We recommend threading all of these together at once to help save time. Now take your pre-cut cable and insert it into the swage cavity of your pivot swage stud. Use your Tyler tool swaging tool to permanently connect your cable into the AXS pivot swage stud. Once your AXS pivot swage stud and pivot eye have been connected to the end of your cable, insert the pivot eye and stud, take your AXS pivot receiver pin, and then insert it through the hole in the receiver and through the hole in the AXS pivot eye. Use a flathead screwdriver to secure the AXS pivot receiver pin into place. The next step in the process will be to install your AXS pivot tensioning fitting. Assemble your AXS pivot tensioner by threading the AXS turnbuckle swage stud into the turnbuckle body so that the threads are just hidden. Then thread the turnbuckle stud onto the turnbuckle body, and then finally thread on the AXS pivot eye onto the turnbuckle stud. Insert the AXS tensioning assembly into the receiver and then thread the AXS pivot receiver pin through the eye and then secure it into place. Use a small flathead screwdriver to secure the pin into place. Grab the end of your cable and then pull the cable tight so that there isn't any slack across the run. Mark the cable at the second mark that you see on the stud. Release tension from the cable and then cut the cable at the mark that you just made. Take the end of your cable and then insert it into the turnbuckle swage stud, and then use your Tyler tool hand swager to permanently secure the swage stud to your cable. Unscrew the turnbuckle body from the turnbuckle stud, reassemble your turnbuckle, and then make sure that it's hand tightened. Repeat the same installation process for all of the AXS pivot tensioners at the post. Once all of the rows of cable have been hand tightened, follow the same tensioning sequence that we laid out earlier in the video. When installed correctly, the HAAS system's pivot components will look great in any angled cable runs that your project requires. If you're just getting started with your own cable railing system, check out our Cable Rail Basics video that'll give you a really good foundational understanding of how a cable railing system works. I'm Tyler with HAAS Stainless. Thanks for watching.